let's start the meeting. So we're recording now, which is good. And we've got hands up from Victoria. So Victoria, I've probably got a question. So if you unmute Victoria, you can ask your question.
Right, if that works, try rubbish from this iPad. Is it working?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, okay. So just wanted to quickly ask, I've been doing keto, not keto, carnivore, like strictly 2 weeks now, but I've got really, really bad diarrhea, which is really rare for me because normally I'm always constipated. But I just wondered if that is normal. I tried, Lydia said about mittens and sort of the fat not being like solid fat, and that can kind of go through you. So I cut that out, and then just didn't go for days. And then I was up in the night, just pretty painful.
It is. Look, it's super common. What happens is when we begin to consume more animal fats or dietary fats in general, the bile production increases, but bile is meant to be absorbed or reabsorbed in the small intestine, and because we haven't been consuming it for prolonged periods of time, it doesn't get reabsorbed. It travels to the large intestine where it causes toilet troubles. It is an adaptation process. It will improve over time. The key to this, as Lydia says, is try not to consume too much of the solid fats. Initially, the rendered fat works really well for me. It doesn't work well for lots of people. Things like MCTs and coconut oils can also cause the gastro distress initially. The key to this is reducing the fat while keeping some in. So keeping enough to allow your body to go through that adaptation process without flooding it too much with dietary fat. So I personally would come away from adding fats to cooking. So if you're cooking with butter, tallow, lard or ghee, remove those, just cook in the fats that the animal proteins come in. And don't pour that fat over your meal. Take the fat away and just eat the protein as it is. Try to stay away from adding any fats, at least for now. As you adapt, you can begin to put these back in and then you'll be thriving moving forward. But it is super common. It's, Steve, you and I see this quite often, don't we?
Yeah, and the ironic thing is, so many people say, I used to be constipated, and now I'm completely other end of the spectrum. But it is that additional bile that makes a big difference. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. I've also got really, really bad fatigue, but is that's normal as well, I guess?
Yeah, it is. So look, your body can be in two metabolic states. You can either be in the metabolic state of glycolysis, where you're fueled by sugar, or the metabolic state of ketosis, where you're fueled by fat. We are naturally predispositioned to be fat burners. So we use this term fat adaptation, when in reality we've become glucose adapted, because fat adaptation is our natural predispositioned metabolic state. But we've taught our body through years and years and years of consuming lots of carbohydrate and lack of fats in order to use sugar for fuel. The whole gut microbiome is now geared up for processing sugar. And the phylum, so the Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes, it's two the predominating phylum within the gut. One preferences glucose and the other will preference proteins and fats. Your whole gut microbiome is now changing, which is also another contributing factor to gastro distress and gastro issues. That can be diarrhea, it can be constipation, but your body does not know how to process fat currently. It's going through this transition period. Even if you are producing ketones, so if we test for ketones through the breath monitor or the urine strips, what these are detecting are wasted ketones in the form of acetone and acetoacetate. So there's three ketone bodies. The primary one, or the king of the ketones, is beta-hydroxybutyrate. But this takes a long time for the body to understand, one, how to produce it, and secondly, how to use it. So the body wastes much of the ketones in the body. And this is what we see through the breath monitor and through the urine strips. These are wasted ketones. But testing for them is still beneficial because it shows that the body is going through this process. But while using acetone and acetoacetate, the body isn't thriving. We're going through this period of adaptation while the body upregulates specific enzymes and pathways within the body to allow us to use beta-hydroxybutyrate. And it can take some time. So fatigue is going to be incredibly common. So there is an adaptation period. For many, it can take 12 weeks. For me, it took considerably longer, but I was incredibly damaged as I came into the lifestyle. You can fast track it through a number of processes. So going back on what I just said in the previous one, which I wouldn't recommend to use currently, but C8 oils or powders, they instantly convert into ketones, whether you're ketogenic or not, and they convert into beta-hydroxybutyrate, which are a signaling molecule, which they signal your body to upregulate its ability to use the ketones. You can also do it through HIIT-style training. So doing some sprints or some HIIT work in the gym, that will force that adaptation a little bit quicker. And probably more importantly, the one that you can address sooner rather than later is electrolytes. Salts are really important. When we become ketogenic or carnivore, insulin drops almost overnight. It begins to drop overnight to the point where we can reverse insulin resistance in as little as 2 weeks. As this drops, it signals the kidneys to release sodium from 4 points in the nephrons in the kidneys. Steve loves me saying that because I repeat it word for word every time. Now that the sodium's been released from the body, sodium is essential for life. It's part of the electron transport chain. We need it to create energy. And now that we're devoid of sodium, the body struggles with energy and it can lead to fatigue and what's known as the keto flu. So adding salt to your meals, pink Himalayan or Celtic sea salt, even more preferably, or electrolytes can help combat and negate that fatigue a little bit. But it is also important just to take a step back and understand that there is an adaptation process going on. And we almost have to undo a lifetime of abuse, of what better term. And we've been feeding the body the wrong fuel, our entire existence. These vegetable oils, these seed oils, which are high in the oxidized omega-6 linoleic acid, foods that are incredibly high in lectins that are causing intestinal permeability, as well as the carbs, which are causing this insulin resistance. All of these combined factors have caused damage over years and years. So there is a process of adaptation, going on, but it will happen. I think it's safe to say that many of us see these adaptations happening relatively quickly. The first couple of weeks, we seem to drop off a cliff. Energy drops, the lethargy kicks in, fatigue, nauseousness, dizziness, all this sort of stuff. But salt is the key initially. And then, after that time, it's that adaptation process of upregulating the body's ability to use those ketones. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Brilliant. No problem.
We've got Mike next. Thanks for that, Victoria. Mike's had his hand up and been very patient.
Hal, thanks again for being here. A few weeks ago, my wife took our 3-year-old son to his pediatrician for his yearly follow-up. Fortunately, I couldn't go because of work, and there were no problems with him that the doctor recognized or expressed. However, when my wife told him that he was pretty much on a keto diet, it varies on the day how many carbs, but pretty much on a keto diet, the doctor said that keto is bad for kids and he should not be doing it. So I got to, I'll give the credit where credit's due. The doctor offered to talk to me about it. So about a week later, which was now about a week ago, we spent a half hour on the phone, and his main concern was that it inhibits growth in growing kids. Keto inhibits growth. Aside from that, he mentioned that ketones are bad for the brain and that newborns are not born into ketosis. So I sent him some literature I could find on newborns being born in ketosis and ketones being good for the brain. But in regards to inhibiting growth, I asked him, I said, what physiologically is happening inside the body that is inhibiting the growth? And he couldn't answer, and he couldn't give me any documentation on it. So I'm just curious if you gentlemen have, is there an argument someone can make where physiologically something is inhibiting that growth?
Yeah. Cheers, Mike. Fantastic question. And brilliant for standing up. Standing up, I mean, I shouldn't say standing up to the doctor really, but unfortunately, this is what we are all up against. Stephen and I work with doctors who are on the level and understand nutrition. Unfortunately, doctors are not trained in nutrition unless I think they have 2 to 4 hours training in nutrition in their entire career, unless they go away and decide to look into this deeper. I had a similar conversation with a neurophysiologist and a nurse yesterday after competing in the Newport 10K race. And the neurophysiologist was mentioning about brain-damaged children after an accident or, a car crash, for example, or anybody for that matter. The first thing they do is feed them ketones, because ketones are preferenced by the brain. And that allows the brain to heal and repair. And then they send them to the ward and then they feed them rubbish, which is absolutely counterintuitive. And this is what they couldn't understand. Why are we feeding the patient ketones in the form of beta-hydroxybutyrate if they're so detrimental to your health? And you're exactly right, they're not. The brain is made of ketones. When the baby is being developed, it's ketones that build the brain. So your brain is made of ketones, and you're 100% right. All babies are born in the metabolic state of ketosis, as you rightly found and sent on. The brain preferences ketones also. If you were to feed the brain ketones and glucose simultaneously, it will preference ketones up to 70% over the glucose. It will preference the ketones in spite of having readily available glucose. The brain does need glucose. There are glutaminergic transmitters within the brain, neurons within the brain that require glucose through GLUT1 and 4 transporters. Only mitochondria can use beta-hydroxybutyrate, and some of the nerve cells in the brain don't have mitochondria, so we need glucose. But again, the body makes all the glucose it needs, so then there's never any danger of us being devoid of glucose because we create this through gluconeogenesis. But coming on from that, the fear would be the potential lack of activation from mTOR, which is the pathway that allows us to grow. Through a standard diet, this is elicited through IGF-1, which to me, I don't think is a beneficial growth factor. No, I take that back. It is beneficial in the right amount, and it's the overactivation then. It's this overstimulation or activation of mTOR through IGF-1, which leads to cancers and tumours. And in fact, there are populations within the world who are unable to create IGF-1 and who don't suffer with cancer at all. So there's definitely a negative side to IGF-1. IGF-1 is elicited through carbohydrate. mTOR activation can be elicited directly through protein, through the amino acid leucine in particular. Leucine is it's a glucogenic and a ketogenic amino acid, but it activates mTOR, and around 3,000 milligrams or 3 grams of leucine will activate this amount to the max capacity. But we can activate mTOR from as little as 1.5 grams. That's found in a tiny little piece of meat. 3 eggs, for example, will contain like 1.5 milligrams. 6 will contain 3,000. A chicken breast is well over 3. So the concern, in my opinion, that the doctor would have in that situation is the ketosis mimics a fasted state. And this is all the doctors see. So we have AMPK, which is autophagy, being fasted, for example, and we have mTOR. And they act like a seesaw against each other. When one is, both are always activated. People will quite often say that when one is activated, the other is switched off. This isn't the case. They're both always activated, but one predominates over the other. So if we are in a state of autophagy, mTOR activation is lower. When mTOR is activated, we're no longer in the state of autophagy or AMPK. This is elicited when we eat protein. So, and it's a perfect balance, which it isn't balanced when we elicit that mTOR reaction through carbohydrate, through IGF-1, because it predominates and it keeps mTOR activated for prolonged periods of time, therefore throwing off this activation. Ketosis will not stunt growth unless you are not consuming enough protein. Every cell in the body is made of protein. Every cell in the body is made of fat. We need protein and fat to grow. We need mTOR. We don't specifically need IGF-1, although IGF-1 will still be elicited, but not to that point where it's overactivated and causing things like tumours and cancers and so on and so forth. So it's that mTOR activation. But I managed to grow comfortably through living nothing but ketogenic and carnivore, muscle hand over fist. it's not going to stunt growth. It's in fact, I would argue the opposite. And the reason for this is if we look at a bolus of protein, for example, that protein we consume breaks down into amino acids. The amino acids are then reconstituted into human proteins, human DNAs, and this heals and repairs every cell in the body. And also the fat. We need the fat also to do this. If we co-consume that protein with things like cereal or bread or pasta, rice, potatoes, there are compounds, as you know from the talks that we've done previously, within these non-foods, shall we say, in the form of fiber, lectins, other phytates, phytic acid, flavonoids, isothiocyanates, the list goes on and on. These can block the absorption of these amino acids and things like zinc, iron, and magnesium, which are all essential for growth. Zinc, iron, and magnesium in particular, B12, iron, these can be blocked by as much as 100% if you co-consume it with one of those compounds. So if you were to consume a bolus of protein with potato chips, for example, fries in the States, we call them chips in the UK. That is potentially enough to block potentially as much as 100%. It's unlikely to be 100. It's very unlikely to be 100 in that case, as far as potato chips go or fries go. But the fact that it blocks some is enough to stunt growth. So I would argue removing those compounds and being predominantly animal-based is going to see more growth. And there's that football player, Steve, you know his name. I can never remember his name. He's carnivore. He's still growing at the age of like 23.
Yeah, Erling Haaland, Manchester City. He's 23 and he's still growing. His bones are still growing and he's carnivore. I just want to do a screen share to put Mike's mind at rest. Because the thing is, if a doctor says something categoric and a rudimentary search on the internet can prove the assertion completely wrong. I mean, you've got to remember that things like Google are backed by the food industry. They don't want this information out there. But yeah, I just put, is it true that babies are born in ketosis? And yes, it is true. And not only are they born in ketosis, they stay that way. And there's plenty of references, as you can see. I mean, the software I use gives me references that you can go to find out that yes, they're in ketosis. Human brain development during gestation, the first few years of life is greater than at any other time. And it's all down to the protein and fats. You could also use a common sense argument to say, why do some countries ban veganism for children? Because they're not in ketosis and they're malnourished. I'm being magnanimous, but everything your doctor said is rubbish. I'm sorry, it just is. I mean, I actually got my biochemistry book out. I've got my medical physiology textbook. No, there's nothing true in what he said at all. Sadly, nothing at all. So hopefully, Mike, that's put your mind at rest. Hopefully. That's it?
Yes, thank you both, gentlemen. I find it interesting that it came back around to that mTOR activation too. I think that's pretty neat. So thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've only got to look at, what do bodybuilders do? It is all about protein and fats. I mean, the body is made of protein and fats, and we can make our own carbohydrates. Rich, just to do a bit of housekeeping, I can see your hand up, Alison. I've also got typed questions, which were before Alison put her hand up. So just very quickly, Gabby on school asked this a day ago, so I think she's ahead of the queue. I won't read the whole thing, but basically she's worried that she's not in ketosis. Probably spoke to Mike's doctor. The reaction to MCT oils is it puts ketosis down, which is unusual. I eat some dairy with MCT and whey protein, and then mostly beef. And our brilliant guy Matthew there has already replied and said whey protein without added fat can spike blood glucose, kick you out of ketosis. I would just do my very brief answer, then we get Rich to do a fuller answer. After what we just said, I mean, as an adult, I wouldn't worry too much about being in ketosis all the time. You can look at your body composition. You can look at your weight. I know you're trying to lose weight, Gabby, and hopefully you're seeing this in the playback because you're not in the room today. But the question is, Richard, what can prevent ketosis? That's the question.
So coming back to what you just said, I mean, is that, first of all, what is ketosis? You know, we look at ranges. We're told that 0.5 is keto. But the truth is, it's far lower than this. You know, if you were to test my ketones, I probably don't even register any. And it's not because I don't make them. It's because my body is so adapted and it utilizes them at such a rate that there's none left for testing, basically. Like, I read incredibly low, 0.1, 0.2. Initially, my ketones went through the roof. But again, these were wasted ketones. So, you know, that's the first thing to take into account. Secondly, if you're eating the right foods and you're not in the ketogenic state, but you feel good, does it matter anyway? In regards to the weight loss, you know, we are still burning fat. So keto is fat burning, but so is beta oxidation. And these are two different things. Beta oxidation is a process which is part of ketosis and fat burning, but it does stand alone if you're not producing ketones and you're still metabolizing fat. You're just not benefiting from the super increase in energy and cognition potentially. But that is still possible at an incredibly low level. Matthew's right in regards to the whey. It's strange that MCT would lower ketones. I've never seen that happen before. It'd be interesting to find out what type of MCT is being used. And again, it could be an adaptation process. Coffee can also, I mean, if you are adding MCT to coffee, and this isn't a knife in coffee consumption, I still think there are benefits to consuming coffee, depending on your reaction to the acrylamide within the coffee. The caffeine isn't the problem for me. It's the acrylamide. Acrylamide is a known carcinogen and it's a known neurotoxin. Some people have reactions immediately. I don't. So coffee works incredibly well for me. Coffee can help as a fat burner. It's a fat mobilizer, especially if it's used pre-workout. But excess consumption of caffeine can increase cortisol. When cortisol and adrenaline, which can also be increased through the caffeine consumption, the body will go through a phase of putting stored glycogen in the muscle back into the body in order to stabilize blood glucose, and this can spike insulin as an alternative reaction and pull you out of a ketogenic state. So caffeine, even though it's a fat mobilizer, excess caffeine or coffee consumption can inhibit your ability to be ketogenic. Most MCTs are referenced to be taken in coffee. They do work synergistically for most, but if over-consuming the coffee, or if the coffee's too strong, then that could have a negative reaction. So maybe take the MCT on its own, maybe from the spoon, or add it to water or something else for that matter. But yeah, that would be my advice there. And then maybe report back next week and see how you are getting along. But I think you're right, Steve, measuring with a caliper or tape measure, the clothes in a mirror is the best gauge. Not, measuring by the weigh-in scale is never the best option for tracking weight loss, because, as you said earlier, we gain more muscle, we gain more bone density. A lot of people don't realize that bone is mineralized protein. You can't build bone with just calcium. You need protein, you need phosphate, and you need sodium. In fact, when we take calcium supplementation, we also take vitamin D and vitamin K and all these other compounds in order to send the calcium to the bone. But it's sodium that does this at a much higher rate. You can't put calcium into the bone without sodium. When we begin a ketogenic or carnivore animal-based lifestyle, we're consuming protein, which contains all of these compounds. So protein is the one compound that we need in order to repair and build bone. And we've seen this in cases of osteoporosis. Osteoporosis in people's over the age of 65 has been reversed with what they classed as a high amount of protein and moderate, which you and I wouldn't class as high, or even, in fact, that amount would be low for us. We're talking an incredibly low amount for the ketogenic or carnivore community. But this is how powerful protein is. But bone weighs. There's weight. There's a weight element to bone as well as muscle. So weighing on the scale is never the best indicator for weight loss. But how do you feel? And I think this is what it comes back to, something Stephen references quite often when we go through blood tests. People will say that this level is low, this level is low. Well, how do you feel? Well, I feel fantastic. Well, what's the problem? we look for problems sometimes when there are no problems, instead of focusing on some of the positives. So don't go chasing ketones. See how you feel. If you are feeling lethargic, then these are other levers that we can pull. But yeah, that's what I'd go with initially. Steve, anything to add?
No, because I'm aware that we've got some more questions, so I do want to get to those. But I've messaged Gabby because she's not in the room to say it's in the playback and it's about 20 minutes in. That is such a great answer. For Mike, what I'm going to do on school is I will put a document up with citations answering the question about babies being in ketosis and also in the brain. So while Rich was doing that, I was putting that together. So if it will be there for you, Mike, later on. Let me just refine it a little bit. It's a bit heavy with all the references at the moment. Right, Alison, do you want to fire away if you're still awake? It's been waiting so long.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Two very quick things. I've just come back from holiday, and it was all inclusive, and I was trying to do the best I could. Do you know what I mean? But when I came back, I was very constipated. And I think it's probably because they fry everything in the oil and stuff. Do you know what I mean? Plus, we probably ate more than we normally do. But I found these Formula One capsules that are completely natural for constipation, and they were absolutely fantastic. So I thought I might put them in the group just as a post or anything, just to say that, these are really natural. Is that okay if I do that?
By all means, for sure, yeah. So look, hello again, Alison, by the way. Great to see you at the conference. I did notice.
Yeah.
You all good?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah, good. So look, we quite often reference these plant compounds and toxins. But, Stephen, I think will agree that there are benefits to consuming these compounds if we're unwell, because these plants make good medication. All medication was developed from plants, initially. And I'm a big fan of that in regards to medicinal purposes. If I hadn't taken medication at some point in my life, I would be dead without question. So I'm not against compounds to confer a benefit in a state of this. So I'm guessing, I haven't seen the ingredients on there, but I bet that they're plant compounds.
Yeah. Senna leaf.
Yeah.
Ginger, turmeric, fennel. Yeah, but they really work. So
look, all of those compounds, I am not a fan of at all, in the slightest, in a healthy environment. Turmeric, contrary to popular belief, is detrimental to the body. It blocks phase 2 detoxification in the liver. It leads to oxalate buildup in the joints, in the thyroid, breast tissue, thyroid gland, all sorts of stuff. It's not an antioxidant, contrary to popular belief. It's a pro-oxidant. And people have probably heard me go on about turmeric and oxalates from spinach many, many times. But in a situation in which you are suffering with something, they do confer a benefit in the short term. And that's because of their pro-oxidant effect. But we shouldn't take medication if we're not unwell. So we take medication, i.e. a plant compound, if there's a problem. But once we've solved that problem, then we move on and we take that compound back out. And the mistake I think that people quite often make is because it's helped in the short term there, they believe that it's a compound healthy to take moving forward. But once that issue has been resolved, then it's time to take the medicine back out. We wouldn't take a chemotherapy pill if we didn't have cancer. Yeah. We take chemotherapy if we have cancer, but chemotherapy kills every cell in the body. And I believe it's the same with medication. If you look at a list of medication, in the list of side effects, quite often there's some horrific side effects in there, and quite often death is listed. But it doesn't mean that medication that hasn't conferred a benefit in the short term. So yeah, by all means, if that's helped with you, the school community is all about sharing experiences, helping others along their journey. So if that's conferred a benefit for you, if that's helped, pop it in, and yeah, I've got no problem with that. You, Steve?
No, that's fine. I think that's a great answer. If Alison's happy with that, we'll move on to the next question.
I think that's Yeah.
Ah, right. Okay.
Either frozen or shocked. I'm not sure which, Alison, but I'll go with frozen.
Right. Lisa, but I've heard many people report that being on carnivore reversed their non-alcoholic fatty liver disease after a relatively short period of time. Can you please briefly explain how eating animal products and fats actually removes fat and stones from the liver? I just want to understand how it works. It's a great question. I would also add that you are removing things. So if you look at, let's forget non-alcoholic fatty liver and think about alcoholic fatty liver. What reverses it? Removing alcohol. And there is a link to removing carbohydrates and removing alcohol, because there's carbohydrates in alcohol, there's carbohydrates in non-alcoholic substances that are carbohydrate, obviously. And the liver converts carbohydrates to fat. So there's a starting point for you. I'm sure Rich will take over. And in the meantime, I'm messaging Mike with my incredibly well-referenced document, which I won't put on the general school. You can if you want, Mike, but I'll send it to you first. But it's got all the references and all the clickable links, so you can, you can print that off and feel very confident about what you're doing. Anyway, yes, back to that question. How does it work? How do we get rid of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease with this way of eating, Rich?
Yep, so spot on. I mean, as you say, excess carbohydrate consumption leads to this through a number of mechanisms. It's increased massively by something like 15 times through the polyol pathway in a state of insulin resistance, where most of us become from excess carbohydrate consumption. But another big contributing factor to this is fructose, which we know comes from fruit and veg, but fructose is also found in grains in the form of fructans. So when we consume grains, the fructans break down into fructose, and the fructose further contributes to non-alcohol fatty liver disease. But when we become ketogenic, this is the first place that the body, the liver, is where we create ketones. And to do this, it uses fat in the hepatocytes, within the cells within the liver. So it uses the fat within the liver. It preferences the fat. So in fact, coming into a low-carb, ketogenic, carnivore lifestyle, this is where we see the biggest reduction of fat initially. And this is also why many people don't see weight loss. So if they are incredibly unwell, we quite often use the terminology that your body's going through a healing process. Well, it's the liver. The liver is healing itself. It's using the fat up within the liver to create ketones, whether it be inefficiently or not. It's using that fat up, reducing non-alcohol fatty liver disease. And then it preferences the visceral fat, the bad fat around the midsection and around the organs. So the first few weeks of keto adaptation, if you like, that's where we see the biggest benefit as a percentage. The body is quite literally using all of its bad fat, which is not it's not this jiggly fat that we see around the belly. It's the fat around the organs and within the liver. And this is where we see the biggest progression in regards to health benefits. But we are quite often told that the fat that we consume leads to non-alcohol fatty liver disease, but this isn't the case whatsoever. As Stephen says, it's that conversion of carbohydrate into glucose, glycogen, and then the overspill into stored body fat, particularly from grains in the form of fructans and fructose. What was the other part of the question, Steve? There was something else in regards to...
Well, getting rid of stones as well. It says there is one more question to do, by the way. Can you briefly explain how eating animal products and fats actually removes fat? So we've done that, and also how it deposits fat is also explained by what we just said, and stones from the liver. Yeah. But it's the same thing. You're talking about saturation points, and stones only appear when you've got a problem with your fluid balance as well. So I think that eating this way basically resolves both those things, the fluid balance in the liver, so you don't get these precipitation of stones. There's an old American experiment they do in school, which we don't do, where you have a solution and you saturate it, and you saturate it with like a rock sort of candy sort of thing. And eventually what happens is a stone pops out, because it gets to a point where it cannot be absorbed in the water anymore, and you actually get a stone. So it's a brilliant experiment. So once your fluid balance is resolved, which it tends to be with this way of eating, you don't tend to get so many stones.
Yeah,
can we go into?
Yeah, sorry, Steve, just really quickly as well. And it's the lack of saturated fats also. The lack of saturated fats and lack of bile production. This can also lead to stone production. So it's a lifetime of lack of essential nutrients, particularly animal fats. And again, just to reiterate what Stephen said earlier, every cell in the body is made of protein, every cell in the body is made of fat. We need protein and fat. These should always be prioritized. But yeah, by doing so, it alleviates all these issues. And Stephen and I see it every single day, which goes completely against what we see on the mainstream media and the medical community, which is why much of our content that we put out gets suppressed, particularly on YouTube, unfortunately. But
yeah, which we've had recently with our vegan versus carnivore video, which took off on the first day and then was squashed. And I've had a couple of videos where that's happened. Alison, I've seen your questions in the chat. We're going to do Lisa's question, which came up first. Given that I have issues with muscles that are constantly tight, should I look for electrolytes that have high amounts of potassium instead of high amounts of sodium? I consume a lot of salt and I take magnesium already.
Yeah, great question. Electrolyte balance is incredibly important. In regards to the sodium, potassium is required more by the body than sodium. It's around 4 times higher if we look as nature intended. So there's roughly 4 times more potassium in animal proteins, for example, than sodium. Potassium we tend to avoid, but I believe that should be preference. The issue with consuming too much sodium is that it depletes potassium. So when we consume more Celtic sea salt or pink Himalayan on our meals, then this blocks the absorption of much of the potassium. So then we need more potassium. I'll be interested to see, Lisa, how much magnesium you are already taking, because the way that the cells work, particularly with tight muscles and cramping, is we need almost an equal ratio of calcium to magnesium. Calcium is excitatory to the muscle and magnesium calms the muscle. So even though you're supplementing with magnesium already, does your diet contain lots of eggs or cheese or dairy, for example? The ratio needs to be 1-to-1. So an egg, for example, will contain roughly 25 milligrams of calcium, and cheese is abundant in calcium, raw dairy, and so on and so forth. So it's quite easy to overconsume on the calcium and not consume enough magnesium. If we look at a piece of beef or lamb, that ratio is incredibly low, but it's 1-to-1 within that serving size. So if we are consuming lots of calcium through either supplementation, which we shouldn't do, by the way. Supplementation of calcium is never a good thing, and we can get into that at a later date. But if you are consuming too much calcium from the diet, we need more magnesium to balance that out. And I would guess that it's probably a lack of magnesium and too much calcium. But it would be interesting to see, if you want to pop into the comments, how many eggs and cheese and Greek yogurt, if you're consuming any of these at all. If you're not, then it could very well be a potassium-sodium issue. But my preference would be magnesium and calcium problem over potassium and sodium.
Yeah, great answer. Now, we've got a couple of minutes left, and Alison asked a question, and I will expand on it a little bit because I've had a brainwave, Rich. So what you're going to see now is myself and Richard having an idea, and whether he likes it or not, you're going to see his real reaction, but you're not being put on the spot. Now, it says here, Alison asked about our talks, or especially your talk at the War on Health. Have we got a recording of it? And of course, we haven't. That was part of the deal, was it wasn't recorded because we had doctors there that wanted to talk about things freely. So basically, if you didn't turn up, you can't be recorded. And also, if people think, well, that sounds suspicious, vegans are notorious for getting videos and editing them and making a different point to the one you're making, leaving out a context and all this sort of stuff. So you have to be careful if you're making assertions. As Mike's just seen, hopefully in his chat, when we talk, we can fully reference absolutely everything. Now, our listeners, would it be a big job to make the PowerPoint available on school? Now, Rich, I don't know about you, but a few people have wanted me to do my bloods talk. We could possibly do a live where we do both our talks.
Yeah.
And do it on school.
Definitely. Look, I've got no problem with recording all of the content that I spoke about in the War on Health. I think Phil and Ben's concern was that the idea is to get to people to speak openly without being ostracized from the community. I mean, if it was recording, it could kill people's careers, as we've seen with Dr. Malik. So I think that was the thinking behind it. But I have no problem repeating every word that I said.
Neither do I. I've put mine in printed form as well. You can get it on Amazon and Apple.
So I'm up for a live, or we can record a podcast and release that, whatever. But sounds good. I'm up for that either way.
Oh, we could even do a little conference on school, which is exclusive, But anyway, right. And we could do talks. Right. So that's it. The playback will be available hopefully within the next couple of hours. Thank you for all your questions. That's really been appreciated. You can put a question on school community in the questions part, not the community part. Put it in the questions part and we'll try and incorporate it. Nothing beats you coming to the live, because if you've got a subsidiary thing to say, and I've got an example of that because Lisa has quickly put some answering to Rich. It just helps so much. So Lisa is saying, you told me to avoid excess calcium, so I stopped eating eggs a couple of weeks ago, and I have not consumed any dairy for years now. A couple of weeks ago, I started to eat butter, and it seemed to foster an immediate benefit. I take 750 milligrams of magnesium, so...
Okay, brilliant. What type of magnesium are you taking, Lisa? Is it citrate? Is it magnesium oxide, glycinate? The type of magnesium is really important. But I mean, that is a lot of magnesium, even if it was oxide. Oxide is about 4%, but I mean, it's...
oxide is rubbish, isn't it, really?
It is, 4%, yeah. In that case, Lisa, we can probably get into glycinate. So so it's not a calcium issue. So coming back to your original theory of it being maybe potassium and sodium, you could try increasing the potassium and maybe go from there. I mean, and that's the thing, we're all different. And this is why it's fantastic to do these types of talks, because one answer may not suit everybody. I think there's a general rule of thumb when it comes to health, well-being and nutrition, but there are segues, off this, some things. But I thrive on higher fat, and other people need lower fat and more protein, and so on and so forth. But this is why it's brilliant. This is why our community is fantastic, because we have so many different people coming from so many different backgrounds, ill health, some are healthy, some are athletes, cancer patients, so on and so forth. But it's, give that a try, Lisa, and we can have an update next week, hopefully. So increase the potassium.
Great stuff. So everybody, that's the time. And thank you for attending. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Your support means the absolute world to me. And if you're enjoying this show, I've got a small favour to ask you. I'd be incredibly grateful if you would consider becoming a supporter and make a small monthly donation. Your contribution will really help to improve the show. I'll be able to improve the software, maybe put a few more episodes out, and do many things that I'm hoping to do in the future. Do them a lot quicker. So, it's a small monthly contribution. You can cancel at any time, and the link is in the show notes. Thanks very much for listening.